What's up? It is the Crypto Bunker podcast. My name's Brian, and today I just want to talk about the sentiment in crypto right now. I want to talk about, the Bankless podcast that I was just listening to with Mike from Blockworks, David from Bankless, and just the general sentiment out there right now just seems so bearish for so many reasons, right? But it's almost as if people are planning for a massive, massive bear market. Um, and it's hard to imagine that we get that. I think Mike during the podcast did say that, 2026 would be, he said he was bullish on Ethereum for the next couple of years. That doesn't mean he's bullish on ETH, the asset, I guess. Um, but, and I could be wrong about this, but there is just so much divergence that I'm seeing between sentiment, which now has shifted. Sentiment has shifted completely, right? So we're at October 10th or October, like beginning of October. ETH is at an all-time high. Everybody's feeling like, okay, now the classic crypto cycle will take us, it'll take us very high in the last quarter, basically, and then that will be it. There was also opinions that, the 2026 would be sort of when we would get the real move. Um, and now I think that most people's opinions have shifted. Um, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong. So they could be right. And crypto is very sentiment driven. So we do have to be aware that, the sentiment begets price in some way, and price begets sentiment. So it's kind of like this circular thing in a way. And maybe some people would say that's like a little bit Ponzi scheme-ish, where it's like it depends, it basically is all dependent on flows. And unfortunately, that is the case to a degree right now, because Bitcoin is basically mostly sentiment driven. It's mostly flows driven, price driven. That's all that really is. It's just price. There's not really any. I mean, there is fundamentals of it, you could say, but it's almost like the fundamentals are the price. And right now the fundamentals are bad because the price is not great. So one thing I wanted to point out about Bitcoin, though, is that you have large sovereign wealth funds who are accumulating Bitcoin. So you have people who are like, okay, I want to know, are the ETF holders long-term holders? Are they going to sell? And I think it's been proven by people like Larry Fink that who basically has said, Bitcoin is being accumulated in the 80s by these sovereign wealth funds, probably Saudi, people in that area. And they're holding it for 20 or 30 years, and they're accumulating slowly over a long period of time, and they're holding for a long period of time. So I think the fact that sentiment has gotten this bad, but we've only gone down like 30 to 40, 35% maybe. To me, I think the cycles are quicker now in crypto. I don't think it's something where we're going to go into this sort of long-term bear market that everyone is used to. But that's what everyone is now preparing for. That's what everyone is talking about. And it's almost assumed at this point that we're going into a bear market. So let's talk about why that is not the case. I know, based on objective facts, that the first quarter of this year, and even potentially the second quarter, will be a low inflation, high growth environment. This is based on the Hedgeye process, and it's a quad 1 framework. Okay, so usually crypto just doesn't do well in quad 4. Slowing, which is deflation and slowing growth. Crypto is really a growth asset at the end of the day. It's a technology, it's a growth asset, and what we're seeing is basically that inflation is going to be coming down, which is going to allow the Fed to cut rates. This is already taking place, but it's going to continue to take place in the next couple quarters. We also see the Treasury, who is going to be pumping in liquidity to the market, because I think maybe 10 trillion of debt is actually going to roll over in this next year. So they're going to cut rates because they need to roll over this debt, and they want that debt to be a low rate when they roll it over to the next interest rate. Now, this is going to be perfectly set up for them, for the government to do this. And so I think the Fed is also starting to do quantitative easing and will be able to continue to do quantitative easing. So they're not just cutting rates, they're actively injecting money into the system as well. So this hasn't happened since 2020, some of 2021 as well. And actually, a lot of altcoins, Ethereum, etc., went up a lot with quantitative easing. So we have that. We have the macro framework. And I think that it's also something to say that a lot of the crypto people are way off sides, okay, on the macro framework. They have no idea what they're talking about. And they don't really know how to actually read the different macro indicators that would help them to understand what's coming. And it's unfortunate, but you can look at rates, but it's not just rates. But they don't even really seem to be looking at rates. Like rates are down a lot. Like the 2 years at 3.5%. So how are you still thinking it's stagflation? Or how are you still thinking with stocks at all-time highs, and volatility at almost, multi-year lows? How is it that with those two things, plus the dollar going down, which means quantitative easing and easing of conditions of liquidity, how is it with all of those macro factors, people are still saying that we're in a sort of, they even would say a high volatility, inflationary environment? How are they thinking that? I don't know. I think there's sort of, in crypto, people all sort of have like individual opinions almost. And they all sort of, end up revolving around, okay, well, the price is down. Why is the price down? Like a lot of people think Bitcoin is the last smoke alarm, right? So Luke Gromen, another person who's now bearish on Bitcoin, okay, hasn't been bearish on Bitcoin probably since I've been listening to him. I'm not even sure he was bearish in 2022. Maybe he was, because he was saying, oh, well, Bitcoin's down, which means the markets are going to go down. So in that case, it was true. That is what happened. And then in 2017, we had a massive bubble in crypto, right? So in 2018, stocks went up, but crypto went down. That was because crypto literally went up like, 17 to 100x from the bottom of the previous cycle. And it was really the first Ethereum cycle, the first ICO cycle. So it was just this massive bubble of speculation. In 2021, it was more like centralized exchanges that were scammers, a lot of scams in the space, a lot of regulatory headwinds that were taking place. And then we also had the macro downturn of stocks. So 2022 was like a combination of all those things. That's why it was such a tough bear market. Obviously 2018 was tough too, but that was coming from like a massive blow off top, which was pretty obvious to predict that would happen, because Bitcoin went up 100% in like 2 weeks at the end of the move, right? So we had the last two bear markets. Now, you can't say that we were in a bubble in this past market. I just don't think that's possible. So I think most people would agree we're not in a bubble. Ethereum barely even made new all-time highs. It's basically been going sideways since 2021. the top since the 2021 top. So it's in a phase of accumulation. And then, so macro is a tailwind. Okay, now regulations are going to be a tailwind. We're going to have market structure. We're going to have Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, all of these big banks, BNY Mellon, custodying Bitcoin, PNC Bank, custodying Bitcoin. All of these things are just coming online. In 2026, that's when people start to allocate to a new portfolio. Okay, so that's good for Bitcoin itself, right? There's going to be, a lot of money that comes into Bitcoin because it's just a natural thing to happen that now these things are available. And with Ethereum, we're going to have the Clarity Act. So the Clarity Act is going to help people understand where everything is at in terms of the Ethereum ecosystem, DAOs, ICOs, etc. What do those mean? And then also bringing assets on chain. So bringing stocks on chain will be easier after the Clarity Act. And this is going through Congress now, and it's getting some traction. I think it will happen one way or the other. Probably the end of Q1, I would say, is when it could take place, but it could be sooner. A lot, people are saying it's going to be much sooner, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so we have that. We have the macro tailwinds, regulatory tailwinds, which are huge. I mean, that's like the two things most people look for. Then you have crypto sentiment. Most times, crypto sentiment is offsides, in my opinion. I did say earlier, sentiment begets price, whatever. But usually at tops, you never hear people saying it's a top. Like Ethereum at 4,900, no one was saying this is the Ethereum top. Bitcoin at 125K, maybe there was some people saying it was the top. I mean, I did make a video back in maybe August or September that was talking about, that it could be the top for Bitcoin. But that being said, it's a matter of the sentiment being so solid. Like people are just like, it is going to be a bear market. I'm in stable coins. I'm earning interest on my stable coins, even with rates going down. Makes no sense. And, now the volatility in crypto has fallen off a cliff. So when the volatility picks back up, it's a matter of which way that's going to go. So it's possible that with price going sideways and volatility going down, the first initial move up in volatility could be a final washout of crypto. And that could be the sign of the beginning of the next bull market. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen in January, actually, as things are still settling in, because there's a lot of macro indicators that are going to come in January. So we got the inflation reading, we got the next Fed meeting, all that stuff. So maybe it's choppy, maybe we get a dip. Then I think we get that. It's that classic sideways, and then it's like a diving board, right? So it's like someone going on a diving board, and then I think we just pick right back up from there. So don't be surprised if that happens. That could easily happen. But my opinion is that it will go up in January overall, I guess. So if you just look at January 1 to January 31st, I think it will go up regardless of what happens in the middle. I think it's very possible that right as January starts, that it just goes. So, I think with volatility down so much in crypto, there's a lot of room to run, and I think that a lot of a lot of the sellers have been washed out now. A lot of tax loss selling has taken place, and it seems like we found a floor. And I think that means that the next volatility spike could go up as well. So be prepared for either way, but I would just say that I'm not seeing a ton of crypto people who are bullish. I mean, I've named a lot of people. Most of them are like, hey, my expectation for, Benjamin Cowan, Ivan on Tech, Santi, Mike, David from Bankless. Um, their only bullish person left is Raul Paul, and he's just constantly bullish because he's more like long term. But the Hedgeye framework is now at neutral trend. So it is kind of waiting to see which way it will go. Usually when it goes from bearish to neutral, it goes up to bullish. The low end of the range for Ethereum is 2,900 and the top end is 3,070. So it's so tight. The range is very, very tight. For Bitcoin, it's like 89.2 and like 86.9 or something. So it's just super tight because the volatility has come down. I expect that those ranges will break up and that we'll get a bullish trend. But like I said, it could be one of those things where it's a quick, diving board and then reversal to just shake, to just test the lows, 2,700, 82K, whatever, at 80K. Test the lows, then we get the real move. But I just think the sentiment is so bad. And it's like long-term bad. Like people are making long-term plans that we're going into a bear market. And usually when that happens, you're going to get thrown off, right? All the builders and the developers in the space are like, okay, now I can finally relax. I can build, I can like have peace. No. Okay, usually that is way off base, like when they think that's going to happen. So it's not going to be easy if we go into like some kind of mania in 2026, but it's very possible that could happen. Hopefully you got something out of the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.